Oh, what's good, my man of society? It is your host with the most, Shadowlock, back at you with another video. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free. That is how you help my channel get into the algorithm. Highly appreciate if you go ahead and do that. It's absolutely free. Join the madness. Now, I was asked by one of my subscribers. He says that he had seen a video of mine, right, and where I had discussed about having differences with certain other YouTube channels, right, and not, being too fond of them. And he asked if I knew these individuals personally, and I said, no. And he said, well, if you know them personally, how could you dislike somebody, right? Or how could you say that an individual is a bad person, right? And that's the beauty about, these, videos, right? Interacting with individuals on lives and watching people's overall videos, right? Is that you get an idea of their character based off of what you see, right? Now, individuals are only going to show you what they want to show you, right? So how do you know that it's not a part of the character or the facade and everything like that? When individuals come on here and they look to manipulate, any individual who's a manipulator or is whose intentions are ill will or whatever, their mask will tend to slip from time to time. It's really hard for egotistical or narcissistic individuals to keep the charade going. So from time to time, you see their mask slip, right? And you get to see the real individual for how they truly are, especially when we're talking about videos or lives, right? They just can't help it, right? They can't control themselves, right? So you'll see them make, certain references, certain comments, take certain jabs, right? Now, normally people be like, oh, it was just a joke, or no, they were just playing, or it was just that one time. People make mistakes. But when the behavior is repeated over and over and over again, right? Those little slight jabs that you catch from time to time, overall, you get an idea of the individual for how they truly are. Like, this is their behavior, right? Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be happening so frequently as it does, right? So it's giving you a glimpse of how the individual truly is. You know, especially respect, loyalty, and all of that isn't given; it is earned, right? I'm not gonna give my respects to somebody, or I'm not gonna trust somebody just because they're telling me you can trust me. You know, the way you earn trust is by showing individuals. The way you earn respect, the way you earn loyalty and respect is by showing individuals. You know, not by telling individuals like, I'm loyal, I'm down, I'm gangster, I'm this and that. You don't need to tell individuals this, right? By your actions, individuals will already know. You'll earn their loyalty, you'll earn their respect, you'll earn their trust, because they have seen it, for themselves, that they know that they can trust you, they know that you are loyal, they know you are down. But telling individuals, just because you tell somebody that, doesn't mean that now you're going to get their loyalty, they're going to get their trust, they're going to get their respect. And normally people that manipulate tend to use these techniques, right? They tend to tell individuals, I wouldn't lie. You can trust me. I'm loyal. I'm gangster. You know what I mean? Because they doubt themselves. It's that they know that they're not loyal. They know that they lie. They know that they're not trustworthy, right? And they think that potentially other people can see it as well, right? But they're not focusing on the rest of the people. They're just focusing on the ones that they're looking to manipulate, right? As long as they can get them to believe it, that's all they need. But the fact that other people might see their charades is the reason why they have to say it, right? I wouldn't lie to you. I know everyone says that I'm a liar, but I wouldn't lie to you. They just got to manipulate the persons they're looking to manipulate. And same with social media. That's how it's worked. They're not looking to manipulate everyone or gain everyone's loyalty, just the individuals out there that they can goose. You get what I'm saying? These are, now I'm not saying I'm a psychologist or I'm an expert in the field of human behavior and stuff like that, right? It's something I'm interested in. It's something that I do, study and, spend a lot of time on. But no way am I saying that I'm an expert in this and stuff like that, right? But I do have a pretty good understanding, of the matters. And it's just stuff like that that I keep a lookout for when, like I said, I don't come into, already judging individuals, right? I get to, see for myself, right? The individuals, I'm not gonna right away trust them, but I'm not gonna be, off the bat insulting them, right? But I get an idea of how the individual is, and then from there I base my, decision. Like, okay, this person's pretty cool, or this person's, is a conniver. You get what I mean? Because on the internet you get different personalities and you get people that behave in different ways. So you do have individuals that come on here and you do see them try to manipulate the audience and people like that, right? And like I said, I just give my opinion, my personal perspective on the matters of the individuals. I'm not saying that um, people have to dislike them. It's just going based off of like what I see and how I see it. You know, um, because like I said, individuals don't have to come on here and try to campaign for themselves, right? In order for people to like, if you are the things that you say you are, people will see it. You don't got to tell them, right? You'll let the evidence speak for itself. You know, actions will forever speak louder than words. You know, it's not so much about what you say, but it's about what you do. You know, you don't got to tell people that you're a good person, right? You'll let your good deeds speak for you. You don't got to tell people that. You'll let your credibility speak for itself. People who have credibility don't need to come on here and constantly be telling people how great they are or how gangster or whatever the matters may be, right? Michael Jordan never had to say he was the GOAT. People gave him that title. People give these people like, oh, this guy's the greatest of all time, or this guy is the best at his profession, but it's not something that they go on and they'd be like, oh, I'm the best. I mean, sometimes you'll get individuals that do say that, right? But then you see the backlash and the opinion of the actual people, right? Who say otherwise, right? Kings don't crown themselves, right? People crown people kings. Nobody likes a self-proclaimed, king, right? Like they're gonna proclaim to be king. um, and that's with anything in general, right? You got to be humble in this world. Um, and that's something that people who are narcissistic, egotistical, that's something that they just can't do. They constantly have to be um, expressing of you know how good looking they are, how smart they are, how how much money they have, how wealthy they are, how gangster they are, how tough they are, you know how many women they be sleeping with. you know when you're constantly always bragging about how many women you're always sleeping with, then it's safe to say that the individual probably is very lonely, and he probably doesn't get that much a company. You're right. Because like I said, if they really were about all of that, right, they're not going to be out there. you know Hugh Hefner wasn't out there always bragging about how many women he slept with. you know he wasn't out there boasting and bragging all the damn time. Like I said, individuals that do that, it's because it's the opposite. you know that's them, like, pretty much homing in on what they don't like about themselves and wish about themselves, right? And then they amplify it, right? So they go out there and they talk about how many women they sleep with, because they probably don't really are probably not even good with relationships, right? They're always talking about how much money they have, because in reality they probably don't have that much money, right? But it's the illusion, right? People are always gonna do that. But like I said, when people really have it, they don't brag and floss it. When people are really about something, they don't come and always brag and talk about how they're this and that. you know it's fooling the audience, right? It's because people expect somebody to behave a certain way if they are that, right? Like they expect that, oh, if they have money, then they should always be bragging that they have money. But it actually works the opposite way. And same with anything else, right? Einstein wasn't going around talking about how smart he was, like that he's the smartest of all time. That's just the title that people gave him. It's not something that he was out there bragging and boasting and flossing. And like I said, that's always worked with anything in this world. you know Only those who are narcissistic and don't meet the criteria are the ones that you constantly see bragging and boasting. And we've seen this time and time and time again, with people getting exposed of, being the opposite of what they say that they are. And yet people still fall for it. It's crazy. But overall, that's just how I base my opinion on individuals, right? I just, I don't care so much about what they're saying, right? But about what they're doing. If they're behaving the opposite of what they're saying, then that already tells me the individual's fake, and he's not really, a genuine person, or whatever. I mean, it's like if a person is always talking about how he's donating to charity and this and that, but going to church, and is about his values, but then you see videos of him in a strip club and snorting drugs. Then it's like, well, he can say all this and that, right, and all this good stuff and all this positive talk and all this positivity, but his actions are showing his true nature, his true behavior, his true way of being. So forever, like I said, actions will forever speak louder than words. You shouldn't just believe people just because of what they're saying, right? Not as what they say, but as they do. And that's just how I live my life and how I base my opinions. But overall, that's just my opinion. What are your thoughts? Leave it in the comments. Shadow, we up.